Hello and welcome to today's episode of the PiXL Drone Show, the podcast where we talk to industry professionals about drones and how they use them in their line of work. Your hosts for today are Greg Reverdio and myself. Hi, I guess hello. If you're new to the show, be sure to subscribe and to like and to share it with your friends and family. It helps us a great deal if you do. And for today, we have a special guest, Ken Dono, better known as OriginalDobo. I've met Ken, I think back in 2000, what was it, 18? Yeah, the launch of the Mavic 2
Yeah.
Pro in New York. I think that's where we first met in person.
Yep.
Um, Ken is up to almost 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, so I'm sure you've seen some of his videos come along. He's known for his videos, but also for his outspoken opinion on matters, which is always fun to talk about with him. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Good to see both you and Greg. So,
Awesome.
yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
to get started, can you take us back in time and tell us how you got started with drones and what was your first drone and when did you get into
Okay.
flying drones?
So let's see. I sort of got into it, like, I guess in the beginning when drones started getting popular, but not like I wasn't like like in the first half. I was like towards the Phantom 3, the standard era, like when DJI just started figuring out, hey, we can make our own gimbals, we can make our own cameras, and we don't have to rely on GoPro. So that's when I started really flying. But I've been doing YouTube for, I think this is my 10th year on YouTube. But I started out in the mobile tech side, like talking about phones and Android software. And then I bought my first drone. It was a Parrot Bebop, and ever since the Bebop, it was like every drone that came out, I had to have, or I had to have something to do with. And I think it was back in 2017, late 2017, I decided I was going to get my 107 to start doing this commercially. There was a big push for it, and yeah, the rest is there. And then we met at we met a couple of places. We met at CES, and then we met at the Mavic 2 event that was held in Brooklyn. I think that was the last live event that DJI really did to that scale.
Yeah, that was as far as I remember the last big
Yeah,
drone event from DJI, which is really
yeah,
unfortunate. I hope with
yeah, it
COVID,
is.
I hope that's going to come back. I know that DJI has been doing a lot of their or all of their stuff basically as online launches, but hopefully those in-person events come back. I kind of miss that stuff.
Yeah, I think it builds. I think it helps build sort of the hype around a product launch.
Yeah.
Gives people a realistic approach, and for them, it's free marketing if you think about it. You invite all these people in, you have the products there. You don't have to provide the product out to anybody, and then you're going to have a plethora of videos that spiral off of these events. I
Yeah.
mean, it's smart. I mean, I get they're saving money too, also doing these events sort of pre-recorded, taking a page out of Apple's book. But I think eventually we have to go back to live events. I think it's the right way to do these
Yeah, for
large
sure. I
announcements.
hope we go back to live events because I mean it's more exciting to see a product being launched that way, but also
For
it gives
sure.
you the opportunity to touch base with people, connect again, see people face to face. And I think over the last 2 years we've been missing that quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I miss
Yeah,
meeting people and talking with people. Like, I met some of the greatest people going to some of these events, and you just don't
yeah,
get that anymore, which sort of sucks.
yeah. It totally sucks. So, but you said that you were doing videos on YouTube before you even got into drones. Like, can you tell us a little bit how you got started with YouTube then?
You know, it was mainly around Android software, routing, ROMs. Back then, everybody was trying to perfect Android, trying to make it a little bit more like the iPhone. Everybody was sort of chasing that. So I sort of fell into that subcategory. I didn't even have a professional camera. I was shooting on a webcam. When I wasn't shooting on a webcam, I was using my cell phone to make videos, and it's crazy what you can do just with your mobile device, to make content, which is insane, because some of my best videos that got great amount of views were just filmed on a cell phone. Not a lot of effort, not a lot of thought into it, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of what I was doing.
Do you remember your first video on YouTube?
Yeah, I do. It was horrendous, man. It was horrendous. It was about an Android ROM, and I remember where I filmed it. I was at my grandfather's house in Connecticut, and it was like the worst video. I had, there was misspellings in it. I mean, it was pretty bad. Lighting was horrible, but it got views, and that was when forums were really big. I was using forums to sort of boost views on the channel. Now you don't even really hear much about a forum. I mean, it's Facebook groups or
Mhm.
Reddit.
Yeah.
That's like the new age forum.
Yeah, the Mavic forum, the Mavic group is the only forum that I know of that's worth going into and getting information.
I
Um,
don't even go into them anymore.
yeah, it is hard with Facebook because everything is in one location. Yeah, I know those first videos when you go back and look at them. I remember my first course I recorded. It was a green screen in my living room that was just draping behind me that I bought at Michael's. And when I go back and look at that, it's just horrendous. Uh,
It's important to go back and watch those videos, I think, because it sort of gives you an idea of your progression, lets you know where you can improve.
yeah.
I'm notorious. I'll go back and just look at videos, see what I was doing, what I liked about them, what I didn't like, and then just sort of try to improve as I go forward.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, oh, it
So
is.
over the years of making YouTube videos, what are the things you think that make the videos more successful?
Good audio. Good audio. Honestly, the biggest thing is like when I'm watching a video, if the visuals suck, I'm okay with that. I'm okay if the visuals suck.
Yeah.
But if you have a good audio, I can almost just put some headphones in and just go about my day and listen to whatever it is that person's saying. And it doesn't really matter what it looks like, but the audio sounds amazing. So it's going to make it more appealing to watch or listening to, I should say. But if your audio
Yes,
is terrible, forget it.
yeah.
You're just going to turn it off almost instantly. So
How many microphones have you? How many microphones have you gone through trying to find the right one?
a lot.
Yeah.
I look at my back wall. I was just saying to myself, I bought another one today because I'm always trying like new things, like especially making content easier or trying to make it faster, a little bit more accessible to myself. But I've settled on Sennheiser when it comes to filming my actual tracks. I think Sennheiser makes good mics for doing these like sort of podcast style videos. These Rode pod mics are amazing.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of effort to make it work, but I think it's important to invest in audio before even video. I would say that to
That, that
anybody.
That's a great advice. I cannot overemphasize on that. I'm like you. I went through and I use Sennheiser microphones as well. I've gone through so many of them, buying so many of them to find the right one. It's just nuts. Learn all you can about that stuff if you want to do good videos.
And that's the thing is, mics are very specific to the individual because everybody has a certain voice and not one voice is going to fit one mic essentially. So it's one of those things you have to go through a couple of them until you find one that like works well with your voice. What works well with somebody else's isn't going to work well with yours. So
Yeah.
I'm overly critical with stuff like that when it's probably not important. Nobody would notice, but it makes a difference to me.
It's kind of interesting, right? That with a visual thing like videos, that actually the audio is what would take first priority.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and I look at all the videos and everything that are produced from the different channels, and you can always tell the ones that pride audio first over visual appearance, and those are the ones that are making these clear, concise productions that is just like it's the information you need as fast as possible, and I don't know, it sort of resonates with me, still does,
Yeah.
always will.
So apart from microphones, can you tell us a little bit about some of the other equipment that you use in your studio?
Yeah, so I'm a Panasonic and Fuji guy. I switched from Sony probably about a year and a half ago. I went down this rabbit hole of trying, different camera systems, and then finally I stumbled upon Panasonic for video. I use Fuji for photo. I think, from a photographer standpoint, I think Fuji makes taking photos really enjoyable because they have, manual analog dials, and it's sort of timeless in a sense. It's like an old school camera, but everything you need is right at the top. ISO, shutter. So I enjoy using those for when I'm professionally taking photos. I use Fuji. For video, I primarily just use Panasonic S5s. I try to keep everything consistent. I'm pretty anal retentive about color consistency and just overall like what I use as far as I want to know that I can go from this scene to this scene, and my equipment is
Yeah.
relatively the same. So
Is there
I mean,
any reason why you don't use Fuji for video recording or no?
oh, well, it's funny. I'm using a Fuji right now. In this setup right here, I use an XT3, and I do use Fuji, for video, but I think it's mostly because of the low light capability in certain situations, and they don't have a full frame sensor. I like that full frame look. Gives you a little bit of better depth of field. And Fuji just doesn't have as much options as far as glass goes when it comes to video. So that's the reason why I chose to shoot with Panasonic for that.
So Ken, I have a question. Actually, I've been meaning to ask you that question for a while. Is where's the name come from for your channel?
So I get asked this all the time, and it's really funny. I had when I was growing up, I used to ride BMX semi-professionally, and we used to, more freestyle, anyways. And there was a day I forgot what we were doing. We were practicing. We were in a session on some trails, and there was just this one line I was trying to run, and I just couldn't hit it. And I was casing and wrecking and bending ribs left and right. And my buddy just blurted it out, Dobo. And ever since that day, it just sort of stuck. And I just threw the original in front of it because I'm the first of three sons. So that's sort of how the name came about. It came back from when I used to ride BMX.
Awesome.
That's cool
That's
story.
cool for sure. Um, so you also got your Part 107
Yeah,
certificate you mentioned.
yeah.
Do you do any commercial drone work, and what kind of work do you do?
So I do actually. So mostly real estate, but my buddy and mine and I, we have a business where we do thermal scans. We work with power companies primarily when there's a disaster or hurricane or something to that effect. They'll send us out to do scanning on the lines, check the damage. They give us basically a bunch of KML files, locations of these poles, power lines down, and then we go out and do the scanning. And sometimes you can be out there for 3 or 4 days, depending on how much the workload is, or you can be out there 2 weeks, just depending on the damage in that area. It's been a little slow this year, not necessarily a bad thing, but it has been a little slow. But we also do roofing inspections, which honestly I like doing them because you can do 3 or 4 roofs relatively quick if you have a team. Do two a
Yeah.
day. That's you do one in the morning, one in the evening, and I think it works pretty well. So there's a lot of flexibility to that in the schedule. So
So
thermal
roof
scans are phenomenal.
inspections. You use a thermal camera on your drone. You do it in
Yeah,
the morning and the afternoon for temperature differences, I guess, or
correct. You can't do it in the heat of the day. It's just you're not going to get any sort of accuracies on the readings. You get a lot of false positives, I guess, when you scan during the middle of the day or just a little bit after sunrise. It's you got to sort of be before that sun starts cresting and like 30 minutes after sundown. Best time to do it. Literally the best time. So, uh, but it's pretty lucrative work. Pretty easy work too, actually.
So what drone do you use? I'm guessing Hotel, DJI. I know you're an Hotel guy.
We use DJI. We use 210s. And we use the Autel sometimes. The Autel's great depending on the situation or the location. We've had a couple of situations where we've gotten our LANC authorization. We're good to go there. DJI is still not self-unlocking. We're calling our contacts. They're not able to get us to self-unlock. So we're like, all right, well, we've got to go with the Autel. So and it works. It works fine. I mean, it doesn't have all the options like DJI typically has, and we like to use the crystal skies still. Um, but I mean, with the smart controller, it's gotten better with Autel, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's 100% there, but they're definitely making good strides.
Mhm.
So
yeah. I saw that you used FPV drones as well. You got into FPV flying, I think, a year and a half ago or so,
yeah,
maybe even
about a
longer.
year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I blame COVID for that. I was bored. We weren't traveling, right? COVID hit. We weren't
Yeah.
able to travel. And I had a lot of free time. All the conventions were canceled. And I'm like, well, what the hell am I going to do? There's really
Yeah.
nothing new happening. So I started learning a little bit about it. And before you know it, it becomes an obsession. And you realize, holy shit, this is fun. This is fun.
And
Um, and yeah, so everybody
it
else
feels
has seemingly
more.
have gotten the bug.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it feels more like actual flying, I think, rather than using a GPS
Yeah,
drone that is stable and
it's
fixed in its position.
it's so weird, and maybe that's because the latency with FPV. It feels like you're real time there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's almost euphoric sometimes when you fly because you're not really flying with any sort of purpose sometimes, and
Hmm.
I think that's the most enjoyable thing about it because so often I grab a Mavic or I grab an Evo, and I have a purpose as to why I'm grabbing it. It's very utilitarian. But when you grab
Yeah.
an FPV drone, there's no purpose. It's just, most of the time you're
Fun.
just flying for fun. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's sort of
but
nice. It's nice.
it's not just fun because I saw you also playing around with using an FPV drone to showcase real estate. Is that something you've done for commercial work? I mean, do people
I've
appreciate that
tried it.
perspective? Or
I don't know. I think it's still really new. I see a lot of people
hmm
doing this. We saw the bowling alley video, and we've saw
yeah,
several videos like that, recently. I haven't used it with any great success like that, but I've also not had a client come up to me and say, "Hey, this is my vision." Sometimes you need somebody to come to you and say, "Hey, this is what I want to execute. Can you help me?" Real estate agents, unfortunately, no offense if anybody's listening, that is one, they lack a vision. They don't have a plan, and a lot of times they want it right now, and if you want something done well, right now is not possible. That's the
yeah,
unfortunate fact of it. So
yeah. It
I
takes a
haven't.
lot of preparation. I mean, that bowling alley
Yeah.
video, and recently one with the swim team from the US and Tokyo. I
Oh,
mean,
that
if
was
you
that was
you
awesome.
it's super
That's
awesome. And
great.
if you know what goes into planning and organizing and timing and having all the people do all the right things at the right moment, that's not something you just throw out there. That takes a lot
No.
of prep.
And a lot of times we only get one shot. We only get one take, like
Yeah,
that bowling alley video. If one thing would have went wrong, the end part where he crashes into the pins, he couldn't
yeah,
have done that at any point. If he even suspected throughout that entire flight, like, oh, I didn't like just this portion of it, that last piece wouldn't happen, because as soon as you hit
yeah,
those pins and that ball's coming behind, you're not going to get another take. Same thing with the guy
Mhm.
that was filming the swim team. He knew at that point he got everything he wanted. I'm taking it down into the water now at this point. There's no coming back from that. That
Yeah.
those
no, there's
are
nothing.
there's just no
We
coming
haven't
back
had
from that.
no, we haven't had one of those folks on our show yet, but I would love to talk to them, kind of pick their brain as to how they make that happen and how many takes it took to
It's
get that right. And I think a lot of the
it's
work went
insane.
into preparation. Yeah, it has to
Yeah.
be.
There's a lot of choreographing that goes into those, and it takes not only a good pilot, but it takes I would say a good supporting cast when you're filming something like that, because everybody has to be on point. If one person is not timed correctly, it throws off the whole shot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's
for sure.
interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall there and hear what they're calling out, because somebody's calling the shots there. I just can't believe everybody. Up, I hear the drone. I got to go. No, they got to be calling
Yeah.
the shot. There's no way around it.
Yeah, and especially when you fly from room to room, you have to coordinate that somehow, right? I
Oh
mean, somebody
man,
has to have the overview, but then you still need to be able to communicate to everybody. Okay, you guys jump in now and do this, or walk into the room.
they've got to be. I mean, again, it's just careful coordination, across the board between everybody. But that's what makes those videos so successful, and
Yeah.
that's why we don't see it replicated often, because I
Mhm.
just don't think a lot of people put the effort down to do that.
Yeah. Have
Yeah.
you seen
So.
that recent video with the what is it, the Porsche Taycan with Johnny FPV, where
Yeah,
they
I watched
replicated?
that.
Yeah.
I've watched his sort of behind the scenes, like his methodology behind that. The other thing that's
Yeah.
becoming huge is the Cinelifter world. Like, we're now all building uh, quads that can lift these cinema cameras, and that's what he's flying. And that's becoming a huge part of Hollywood and commercials, and people want
Right.
these dynamic shots. No, gone are the days where an Inspire was the most dynamic shot you can get. I
Yeah.
think that's why a lot of that work is sort of dying out. We're not seeing
Yeah, I
we're not
agree. I mean,
seeing
I remember, I think it was a ski or a snowboard video where they were going down a hill, hitting all these jumps, and there was one guy
yeah,
flying an FPV drone around it, circling, and you could see the guys flip in the air, but then your perspective kind of circled that's the
right.
person, and immediately I was like, this is the kind of stuff we're gonna end up seeing in the next James Bond movie, for instance, like where it's the action not just happening on the screen, but you as a viewer are part of the action as you move around that whole situation.
And I think that's why we haven't seen, an update to the Inspire series. We
Hmm.
really don't need one. We really don't need one,
Yeah,
in a sense, because there's so many quads on the market that are able to be built that can house a camera that matches the production company's quality in a sense, and that can give them a much more dynamic shot. Maybe not as consistent of a shot, but definitely a lot more dynamic in terms of the visual experience that the viewer is going to look at. I think, anyways. So it's interesting to see this happening, though.
Yeah, I was watching Top Gear. I don't know if you guys watch Top Gear, but the last 2 seasons they've been using FPV drones. in their shots, and you can tell such a huge difference. They use them in chases, they use them all over the place. It looks so cool. And speaking of FPV, Ken, I know you're working on a project now to lift a heavy camera. Can you tell us a little bit more? I've seen the pictures on Facebook that you've been sharing.
So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been taking designs that are already produced. For instance, Andy Shen designs an amazing cinelifter called the Thick. And one of the problems that we've encountered across the board is so many of these cinema cameras have a problem shooting a codec that most production companies want, which is ProRes. Production companies want Apple ProRes, whether it be Apple ProRes RAW or just ProRes. A lot of these cameras can't shoot internally, so they shoot externally into a Ninja Atomos. So what we've done is we've built a cinelifter that can stow a recorder, an external recorder, in the belly of the chassis. So we basically modified his chassis design, and it's going to stow the recorder in the center. You'll have an HDMI cable running out of your cinema camera into the recorder, and you'll be able to click record. You'll be able to view, everything that you want it in real time, and then record it directly to the Ninja externally. So that's sort of what we've been working on. We've ran into some problems with some designs, but I think we're almost there. Probably like end of this week, we should be able to do like our first maiden with the BGH1, which is a cinema camera. And the greatest thing is, even running it with this Ninja Atomos in the belly of it, it still weighs less than the Red Komodo, which is, again, that's what everybody wants to shoot on is Red. But there's a huge weight that comes in. It's like 2.5 pounds just for the camera itself. So we're like at 1.25 pounds, I think, 1.25 pounds with lens and Atomos. I mean, it's crazy how little this adds to the weight. So really excited to get that one launched, and we'll see if more people are interested. We're going to sell like these upgrade kits for it, and we'll see where it goes.
Oh, that's awesome. And so that really opens up a ton of different cameras. I mean, I record with GH5S, and you can do that, export high res to the Atomos. That's pretty cool. And you do other things too with FPV. You build parts, you 3D print them. I know you have them in your studio now. You have a beautiful 3D printing areas. Can you tell us more about the design that goes behind this? Because I know you design your own parts for the DJI FPV, for example.
Yeah, so when the FPV drone first launched, there was some things that we were finding out about it. Like, hey, why did they put antennas in the batteries on the feet that you land on? So we started designing and started CADing a cover, basically, just to protect it. And initially, when we first started down this route, we were like, we're just going to make this for ourselves, buddy and mine. And we started, messing with it. I would CAD something out, print it, and I'm like, I'm not really happy with that. I would send the design over to him. He would go and, tweak it a little bit more, send it back, and we'd print, we'd go back and forth until we found, exactly how we wanted it. And I think we just posted it, just on Facebook or somewhere, and somebody's like, I want that. Like, all right, well, we'll set up an Etsy store and we'll see what happens. I didn't think anything of it, and I don't know, 3,000 orders later, there's probably a cover on 1 out of 5 FPV drones, possibly. So, we do the GoPro mounts because the camera is sort of it doesn't shoot in a bunch of different frame rates that people want. So if somebody wants 24 frames per second, you got to mount a GoPro to it. But one of the things we found was all the GoPro mounts weren't really working well with Real Steady. So what we did was we designed one that was rigid enough to absorb vibrations and be able to basically be used with, 3 of the GoPros that work with Real Steady without soft mount. And so made a couple of different changes to that, and I think it worked well, and it was really well perceived. But, as long as a company produces something that has a need or isn't quite what the end user wants, we'll always be able to design and print things that can bolt on, hopefully. I think DJI did a good job with the FPV drone. It's sort of lacking in some areas, unfortunately, but it's a good start, though.
Exactly, I was going to say just that. I mean, if you view it as a first generation drone, first generation FPV drone from DJI, then they'll probably fix some of those issues in the second generation.
They're not stupid. They're not stupid. They probably go back and look at this and say, well, maybe we need to make it out of a little more robust material next time, and maybe we need to push this off on the end user to make these repairs a little bit easier, so it alleviates the stress of our teams having to take on these. Because I'm sure, like people think, oh, they're just doing this to make money, but I'm sure that they don't think like that. They're like, shit, this is going to handicap our teams essentially, because now we're having to constantly produce these or fix these. I mean, they don't want to do that. They would probably be fine if it's something like this, with the end user repairing it. I don't know. People just view them as this evil company.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've been always surprised with how aggressive DJI has been towards its own products. Like if you look at the launch of the Mavic Mini and then coming out with the Mini 2 or the Air 2 and then the Air 2S, like they've been quick to come up with a better version of their first iteration or their first generation, I should say.
I think what we forget is that they are their own worst critic, though. They're their own worst critics, though. Their team is. You can just see it with the critic. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they're harder on themselves than we are of them, as a consumer. I mean, we don't see what happens internally with them, but I'm sure they're pretty critical on themselves. They have a lot of pride, and that's probably why we see these revisions so fast. It's not that they're trying to cannibalize their sales. It's like, hey, maybe we're just not happy with what we put out first. Let's make it better. Yeah, it's going to piss people along the way off, but that tends to happen, unfortunately.
I think it's surprising that they do that, because with the lack of competition, really, there is no financial need for them, at least, to come up with new generations so quickly. So I think you're right that they're pretty critical on their own products. And if things aren't right or they could have been improved, like with the Mavic Mini and the video quality there, they come out with something quickly. And yeah, I think that's pretty awesome. Talking about DJI, we're all waiting for the Mavic 3. Do you have any thoughts on what you would like to see in the Mavic 3 and what would make it the drone to go to for you?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I've been really happy with the Air 2S. I mean, that's been my go-to. I mean, it's so small. It's easy to just pack in a bag, and I don't give it a lot of thought like I used to. But, I mean, how do you really improve upon the Mavic 2 Pro? I mean, it was a great piece of gear. I mean, obviously they could do better with the batteries. I think longer battery life would be super ideal. But I think, when in regards to cameras though, I mean, I don't think you can bring back a 1-inch sensor at this point. I think the industry is sort of moving towards micro four thirds. Micro four thirds may be dead everywhere else, but I think in drones, it still has a place in a drone because it's still compact enough. I think you got to go micro four thirds, possibly even make a interchangeable camera system that's user friendly, user intuitive. Autel tried. They made a user replaceable camera, but it's not intuitive, and it's not hot swappable in any sense. Not like what DJI could do with the Mavic 3. I think if they do that, they've got something unique that's going to be really hard for others to replicate. I think if you're going to do it, you got to do it like that.
I think one of the things that made the Mavic so successful was the fact that it's a foldable drone, right? I mean, if you compare it to the Phantom lineup, a Mavic fold it up, throw it in your backpack. And I've always wondered, like, if you were to go to a fast zoom lens on the Mavic or interchangeable lens system and with a larger sensor, do you still get that compact foldable drone that is so easy to take along?
I think they can, but they got to sort of differentiate themselves a little bit, because you've got like these tiers of folding drones, right? The size difference between the Air 2S and the Mavic 2 isn't a large enough gap, as opposed to the Mini to the Air 2S. There's a pretty substantial size difference there. And then if you go Mini to, Mavic 2, I mean, there's a massive difference. So I think they need to separate that gap a little bit further. I'm okay with a larger drone if it's producing a higher quality. You can still make it foldable. I don't think necessarily it has to like fit in my pocket, because that's what you have the Air 2S for. That's what you have the Mini for at that point. But I think at this point, they sort of need to go hybrid between Phantom and Mavic 2 to be able to retain that quality. I think that would be an amazing thing to do. But I don't know if we're going to see it as, this fall at this point, maybe. But with these chip shortages and things like that, I mean, it's tough to really say.
It is. Do you think the Mavic 3, and if we're talking about interchangeable lenses and all of that, do you think that's the end of the higher end lineup for DJI? We haven't seen a new Phantom. We haven't seen a new Inspire.
I don't think it's the end. I mean, here's the thing we all get hell bent on, in the industry, that we have to have a sequel to a product, right? Like, because it was so successful, we have to,
Yeah.
have a sequel, just because in phones, Apple's ran out of ideas for calling their phones, that we just add numbers to the end of something.
Yeah.
I think that, DJI can bring out something entirely new, and it would be just as successful. I think every time DJI brings out a first generation product, the sales go apeshit, right? They go crazy. You look at the FPV drone, wildly popular, I think it was super
Yeah.
successful. You look at the original Mini, I don't think DJI had a more successful launch than that Mini. That Mini was hot, hot, hot. Same thing when you looked at the Mavic 2, or even the original Mavic. The original Mavic was back ordered for months. You couldn't get your hands on it. I don't think they anticipated it to be so popular, so successful, but it was. So I think that they can have a whole new name in schematic, or they could bring something back that hasn't been out in forever, and see where it lands. It's really tough to say. I mean, we'll have to see what they're able to do. I just think materials are the biggest challenge.
Yeah, especially at the moment. Do you think it's funny because when you see Apple having issues creating iPads, and you know that there is an issue somewhere if Apple can't get chips, so yeah, that's going to be that's going to be
I mean,
tough.
we've seen it plague the entire industry, really, and it's sort of sad.
Yeah, it is. So, what's the trend right now that you see in the drone industry that you're excited about, if any?
Um, there's really not many trends really right now, like that I see, like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to be a part of that. I mean, the industry is sort of unique because it's so split. Because you have our commercial side, which those guys are just trying to do whatever it is to get their job done, right? Like whatever's going to make them work smarter, not harder, is the way to go. I mean, I guess if I had to pick on really any trend, I like the autonomy aspect, from Skydio. I like what Skydio's doing. I don't necessarily like the cost of what they're doing, because, with the X2, I'm hearing things that it's not like fully baked, and that there's still some problems with their mapping utilities, and so that's a little concerning. But I mean, I like the way it's going as far as autonomy goes. However, I think you're going to get to a point where autonomy is going to become so sufficient that it could essentially replace operators, other than we just set it up, press a button, and go. Which, I don't know, at that point, who's really doing the work? I mean, sort of
Mhm.
sort of scary. It's sort of scary in a sense, but I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's where essentially it's going to end up going.
Yeah, I mean,
But
we've seen a number of companies kind of come up with that dream, right? Where you have a drone in a box on regular schedules. The drone
yeah,
flies itself, does its job, come back, lands back in the box, charges, and is ready for the next day. I think at some point we'll probably see that somewhere happening
but
on a
but
regular
let me
basis.
ask you: do you think we're there now? You think that that's a stretch right
No,
now? For yeah, I don't think we're there right now for drone in a box.
I think technically it can be done. I think what you're going to run into in most countries is regulations that
Right.
simply won't allow you to do that yet. I think technically, if yeah, you probably can have a drone in the box that flies over a construction yard and models it every day or every week to show progress and change. I don't think the regulations allow for it. I think
Yeah.
that's the holdup, and it's not just there. I think regulations is what's holding up the drone industry in many parts.
Oh, that's a fact.
Yeah, I
Unfortunately,
mean, if you talk
FAA takes their time.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to people who are in the first responders community and the way that they use drones, and they cannot fly them beyond visual line of sight. And when you talk about beyond visual line of sight, people are like, "Oh, I'm going to fly my drone 5 miles away." No, that's not even what they're talking about. They just want to fly behind the building, which is out of sight, but it's not far
Right.
away at all. And that's the kind of stuff that they're not allowed to do. And I think also when you look at first responders work, a lot of times it happens in not the perfect weather conditions. So what if it's smoky or there's a lot of fog and you can't see your drone, but you can still fly it, and it has a thermal camera, so you can actually see where you're going. I think that's the it's a more granular level of how we use drones or how we would like to use drones. And I don't think the FAA or any other body that regulates airspace is there yet, where their rules accommodate all these different groups and all these different use cases for drones.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality is the technology is moving so much faster than
Yeah,
regulations. As fast as we can develop something, the FAA is just now catching up to things that were produced, let's say, 2 years ago at that point.
yeah,
So they need to get with it, unfortunately. But I mean, I understand, in seeing the reason why we have the regulations that we do. I understand, every time I get on a plane, I think to myself, well, this is the greatest country to fly in. Like, if you're going to fly on a plane, there's no safer place to board a plane than in the United States. I mean, because they make it
Yeah.
so safe and they're so stingent with the regulations, it makes me feel good knowing that.
Yeah.
So I know, like, us as operators, sometimes we want the regulations to, get done, exponentially quicker. But in the same token, this is the reason why our airspace is so safe, because they do take their time and goes through so many different channels. And
Yeah.
I think we'll get there. I think we'll get there, and we'll see what the
I
future
think
holds in that
I
regard.
think so too.
Well, you have to remember too. Yeah, you have. I was going to say that you have to remember the FAA is a manned aircraft agency in the first place that get basically drones dumped on its lap, and then now they're trying to recover and see how they're going to make it work. So, for the longest time, if you look at the history of the FAA, they wrote regulation in blood, and every time there was an accident, we saw new regulation. And I think with the drones, they're going the opposite. They're going super strict, and then as they're learning and getting data, then they're going to relax things. And I hope I'm right, but I know a lot of people.
I hope you're right with that too. You know what I meant to ask you? I don't know if you covered this on Drone XL. What do you guys think of the Rocket Man that they keep spotting around LAX? Have
You think that's an
you
actual person or no?
listen, man, I don't know what to think of that, but I listen. There's a channel that just streams the ATC chatter, and I know it sounds like a weird pastime,
Yeah.
but as I sit in the office, I'll leave it on, and I'm just listening to ATC chatter. And when that came through, I was like, "What?" But I've heard this
What?
several times. They're saying, and pilots are saying they're seeing this person with a jetpack at 5,000 feet, which 5,000 feet is still perfectly breathable air at that point. Yes, it's high as shit, but it's still breathable up there at that point. The air is not so thin to where this is not feasible for this to be. I mean, we've seen these jetpacks. We know they exist, but I mean, 5,000 feet, it's a bit of a stretch. I don't know. I mean,
My theory.
What do you think? It's a
My theory
genius
is
invention, guy.
the
it's
best
one
is
of
they
two
call it
things.
Iron Man.
Yeah, it's one of two things. It's either somebody that has a drone that's playing a prank and putting like some sort of a costume on the drone, like you saw for Halloween with the Green Reaper, or it's somebody with a really big set of balls that is just flying around at 5,000 feet near LAX. I mean, these guys are in final of LAX. They're really close to very, very large aircraft. And I don't know who would be nuts enough to do this. It is just insane.
But I believe the pilots when they say this, because when you look at the mentality of a pilot, right? When you look at like what goes into becoming a pilot, a commercial airline pilot, I mean, these guys, they are black or white. There is no gray area for them, because when it comes to safety, it's either black or white. And when they are saying that they see a person on it with a jetpack, I'm like, you know what? I tend to believe them, because
Yeah. Several people too in a row. When you have this is the third time I think there is a report. The second time there were two people that reported it in a row, two airliners, one from China and then I think one from the U.S. And then somebody took a video of it. I don't know if you guys saw that, or a picture of it at least, of that thing just flying around in the pattern area somewhere. It was just insane.
it's pretty crazy. I mean,
It's crazy though, because
I don't know what to make of it, but it's pretty wild. I
I
thought
mean,
I'd
how
ask.
often can you fly and how often can you take off and land with your jetpack in a congested area like LA, right? I mean, I don't know about flight time and range and all that stuff, but at some point somebody's got to see you take off in that thing, if that's actually a human being, no?
Yeah, or land, or whatever the situation is. I mean, I can't believe somebody doesn't know about this. Like, it's not orchestrated at a higher level at that point, because I mean, that's pretty crazy. I don't know. Like, what is the velocity? When you're flying like that, I'm almost curious. Like, what is the velocity of speed that your body can withstand when you are flying, like at that altitude, and two, speeds that, if a plane can see you, you got to be going pretty quick. They're doing 500 plus miles an hour, maybe 400 on their initial descent. So you got to be going at least $120, almost 200 miles yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty crazy.
I would I would compare it to either the people that base jump with those wingsuits, and I think they are 200 miles an hour or something.
Yeah.
And I've seen that video with what is it, Qatar Airlines or from Dubai, where you have I think it's
Oh
two
yeah.
people flying jetpack with wings next to Boeings. You got to go pretty fast for sure.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, there's not my cup of tea, to be honest, but that's why I fly drones. You won't catch me in a jetpack anytime soon. But yeah,
Keep
very
your feet
interesting.
on the ground.
For sure, man. For
Hey,
sure.
I do want to kind of bring it back to regulations and the FAA.
Yeah.
We know that regulations and the whole FAA process, for good reason, is not a very slow, a very fast moving process,
Right.
and it creates a lot of tension with a industry that's so rapidly developing with all these new use cases, new technology, and whatnot. I think one of the biggest things that's coming our way is remote ID, and I'm curious to hear your opinion about this. Do you see this as a industry enabler, where with remote ID we're going to be able to do all these new things? Or do you see it as a big threat to your ability to fly? And do you think that most people are not going to comply with this new rule?
I do see that there's going to be a tremendous amount of pushback, just
Yeah.
from pilots in general. You've got a large scale community that doesn't agree with this wholly, right? Like the general consensus is they don't agree with this. They don't want to be tracked like that. They want to be responsible, trusted that they can be responsible without having to transmit data. You also have a problem with, the FAA really hasn't clearly outlined how this is going to be achieved, how this data is going to necessarily be processed. Are you going to use third parties? Who's the third party that's going to do it? And then also, what type of devices are we going to be allotted to use? Because you have, a whole industry that builds and manufactures their own equipment, specifically in Hollywood. You think about like Cinelifters and things like that. Here we have machines that don't have a serial number that
Yeah.
that's built for a specific use case. So they're going to be expected to comply to this. So are you going to make a transmitter? Like, how are we going to get to that point? And I don't even think that they know at this point how they're going to get there. I don't necessarily agree with it, just because I think that the vast majority of people that do fly genuinely respect the airspace and respect the hobby to an extent that I don't even think that the FAA really understands. You do have a few bad players, but if we compare, drones to plane crashes, right? We're far lower incidents per flight. Like per flight, we have a much lower incident ratio than even airliners have. So I think that should speak volumes of the education that they've put out there. They should feel good that the education is working, but I think they should double down on that education, because if you don't provide people with knowledge, they can't make good decisions. They can't make good decisions. And I think that's their problem right now, is they don't have it accessible, and people buying drones don't know. Look at the guy that hit the World Trade Center 2 weeks ago. He had no freaking idea. He had no freaking idea that he wasn't allowed to fly there. Maybe he did. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't, but still, like, they need to be better about that. They need to be better about that. So, yeah,
I agree.
I don't agree with it.
Over the time, I've had a whole bunch of conversations about remote ID with different people in the drone industry. And every time that you compare it to license plates on cars, and you imagine that for regular people who drive cars to work and for leisure, whatnot, if you were going to implement remote ID for automobiles, people would lose their shit, and people would not be okay with that, for sure. So,
but that's the thing. We don't have the backing of many. We don't have the backing of many. That's the problem. Is we don't have enough people coming to the aid of this industry, or we don't have enough education to really take it that level. And that's where, I hope with what Vic and Kenji are trying to do with Drone Service Providers Alliance, is to get to that point where they can get into, I hate to use the word lobby, but we need lobbyists that are on our side to educate lawmakers, what it is exactly that we do, why it is a lot safer to put, us in the air, to whether it be inspect buildings or just anything in general. They need to have education on that. I think a lot of lawmakers fear for privacy, but yet they're the same people that are tearing privacy down when we're actually enhancing it, in a sense, and we're putting, less lives at risk with drone operations. I think we could get to that point. I think what they're doing is amazing, you know, and I think that eventually it'll get to a point where it'll reach the right people. I already see a couple of senators starting to turn and like, hey, you know, this needs a little bit of attention. So if we can get to that point fully, maybe, you know, the FAA has got another
Yeah.
2 years before they say, okay, this is what's going to happen officially. And then, you know, even after that happens, they have to implement it. So we're still far away from it actually ever seeing us.
Yeah, we still got time. I think a lot of people worry about it, but we're still pretty far away. Yeah. Hiya. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say, I think one of the problems that the FAA is dealing with is, I mean, not only is there a lack of good drone rules, and they're trying to implement
Sure.
them, and it's a slow process. I think the other problem is that the use cases of drones are so varied, is that you cannot have one set of rules that applies and works for everybody. I mean, you can have perhaps a basic set of rules, but then you need to allow for different use cases. And I think if you look at the way the movie industry is using drones versus first responders versus inspection, I mean, there's so
Right.
many different
It needs to be a tree.
categories.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
yeah, there
it
should be
needs to be a tree.
different categories, and I don't think the FAA allows for that right now. And then we're not even talking about companies like Walmart and Amazon trying to use drones for logistical purposes, right? Because that would be a
Right.
totally different use
We,
case. And
we
I
don't
think
even
that's
have
where
sheltered operations here in the States.
yeah,
Did you know? We like, you know, I think of like when I fly FPV, a lot of times when I am flying, it is a sheltered operation because I am well
yeah,
below my tallest object. I mean, I'm, you know,
yeah.
sub 30 feet in most instances under coverage. No
That's
manned aircraft,
navigable
no manned
airspace.
aircraft is going to be in my airspace at all ever. The only thing that I would be in contact with would be a pedestrian. So I think that those are things too that they need to assess and say, okay, well,
Mhm.
you know, if this is the type of flight you're doing, this is considered a sheltered operation, and you know, I don't know.
So
I think those things need to happen.
So this is a question maybe then for both of you. Do you think that the FAA is even equipped to deal with unmanned aircraft, or do we need like a separate branch of the FAA that's solely focused on unmanned aviation or uncrewed aviation?
That's a really good question. I honestly think they need a separate division. You know, I think they
Mhm.
need a separate division that it could be a part of the FAA, but it solely focuses on UAV, UAV only. Just like, you know, we have like the National Board of Transportation and all, you know, we have all these different entities that handle the different
Yeah.
subcategories of, we'll call it air travel. I think they need to have something specific to drones, just in general, because you
I,
need
Yeah.
experts that handle that.
I think you'd be amazed how few people at the FAA are actually in the drone program. I mean, I've talked to the FAA over the years over and over again, and I always end up talking to the same people. You always end up seeing the same people, and it's a fairly small group. But you know, to their defense as well with remote ID, there was a lot of push from other agencies as well. This was not all the FAA is doing. You've got other three-letter agencies that are pushing to get their requirements in there. And I know the FAA had to juggle the 50,000 comments from us and then also the comments from the higher ups and from everybody else. So I don't want to be in their position. And I tell you, I talk to the FAA pretty much weekly to someone at the FAA about something. And these guys are great. They're great to deal with. They're great people. I always tell people there's two sides of the FAA. There's the FAA as the name and the logo that we don't see a face. And then there's the people that work for the FAA that do the work on the front line. And that's two different sets of, that's two different entities to me. The FAA people that I deal with all the time, they're great. They know what they're doing, and they want us to fly, and they fly themselves. They're drone pilots.
Yeah,
And
I would agree. The people
I think
that
those
I've
are the
met from
people that we need to
yeah,
know.
great. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I think that's the problem is, you know, you have to disseminate that fear that most the industry has of them. And it helps sometimes having a front person or a face to, you know,
Hmm.
to put towards these regulations. And sometimes you don't really have that. Um,
No, they don't. They have an issue with communication for sure. They don't have the staff to be in front of cameras like we are, talking about this stuff. They don't have that. So I guess my question to you, Ken, about remote ID, the biggest thing for me with remote ID is the ability for people to see where my drone is and where I am and come and harass me when I fly. It doesn't happen to me because I live in a fairly rural area and away from stuff. But have you had any issues with flying your drone? I know you fly a lot of commercial stuff, so I'm sure you see a lot of people. What's the reaction?
You know, I always think about that as I go into a subdivision or a community. Um, Yesterday I was doing photos. It was like about 5:30 at night, 6 o'clock or so, and I was getting ready to get up in the air to do photos. And this gentleman approached me and said, "Hey, you flying this in here?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You know the airport's right over there." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." I said, "It's Sunday, airport's closed, so this is basically Class C airspace at this point. We don't have to worry about it because they're not operating at this point." So took off, did my thing, and he goes, "You're not flying that over my house, are you?" I said, "No," which I mean, I wasn't, but I said, "No." I said, "And if it's to get a shot, it's going to be just primarily of this." He goes, "Well, I don't want my house in that shot." I said, "No problem." I said, "We can blur that out." I said, "It's not a big deal." I let him see what I was doing. I let him see the controller. I could tell he's never flown and the more I started talking with him and showing him, you start picking up on gems. Like he had an Alabama shirt on. I was like, all right, let's talk about football. We'll change the subject entirely. So you got to like look at it. These are sales tactics I used to use when I was in automotive. You'd look at things that you can quickly change the subject. So you do that, and next thing you know, he was like, how much do these cost? So it was a shitty situation turned, I think, really well, and he was happy. And he learned a little bit about something, and it took me 10 minutes. It took me a lot longer to shoot these exterior shots than I anticipated, but it was worth it to not getting to an argument with this guy, because I shoot in that development a lot. So next time I go in there, he's not going to bother me. He's going to know who I am, and it's a little bit easier. But that's sometimes how it works. Other times there's nothing you can say or do. It's just they're going to berate you. Prime example, I had my goggles down one day. I hear footsteps coming up to me, so I quickly haul ass over to where I'm at and start running the perimeter. And I see this old lady, gardener gloves, hat on, and she's yelling at me about birds. And I'm like, all right, I've flown here so many times. I've never seen any endangered birds. I don't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And she's yelling at me to leave. In that situation, there was nothing I could have done. And again, simplest thing to do I can do is just leave. Whether she's right, I'm right, it doesn't matter. I'm not looking to argue with her. And when you're flying FPV, that's a little scarier. Now, should I have a spotter in those instances? Yes. Do you? No. I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, I just leave. I don't argue with the people anymore because nothing's gonna come of it. Nothing. They're just gonna think all pilots are assholes at that point. So there's no point in arguing with them, right or wrong. You just either try to educate or leave. The elderly are the best, though. They're the best. There's a 50-50 shot. They're gonna like enjoy what you're doing. They're gonna think it's amazing, and then there's times where they want you to crash and burn, but for the most part, I've had awesome experiences in some of these 50, 55 and older communities. The people are really cool.
Yeah.
But I've not had too many issues. I think,
Well, you don't have-
what's that?
I think some. No, I was going to say, I think what we sometimes forget, I mean, we live and breathe drones, right? We talk about
Right.
it so much, we fly them so often,
Yep.
we know what it's about. And I think sometimes you forget that the general public, they might not even know what a drone is still at this point. And
Yeah.
I run into that sometimes, and it's cool that you take the time to educate
And
them.
you gotta pause. You gotta pause. I know like people think I'm like this giant asshole online, but genuinely in person, when I'm talking like to these elderly people and like they're like they don't know, you can sense fear. Like the best thing I can do is show them, because I'm sort of essentially planting seeds for the future, because I know I'm going to end up back in this community. I'm going to end up back in this development again. I don't want to make my future work difficult. And if it takes me 10 minutes to diffuse this situation, I'd rather just diffuse the situation now. And you don't know whose grandmother it is. You just genuinely don't know. But for there are situations where, like I said, there's no diffusing. I think when we talk about remote ID and the ability of the general public to see where you're flying, do I think there's going to be a large issue of people coming up on us? I don't think so. I think if they advertise that you have the ability to do that, maybe. There are going to be those one-off instances where somebody's going to get robbed. They're going to get beat up because they're flying somewhere and somebody knows where they are. But I think the general public, I don't think we're going to have a problem. We're going to have these exceptions, but not the rules.
So is it fair to say that you're a nicer, friendlier person in real life than online, perhaps?
I would say, yeah, I would say, in person, I mean, I could go zero to dick pretty quick, but
Uh,
you
yeah,
know, I have a soft spot dealing with like, that 55 and older community because they just
yeah,
don't know, they just don't know. And I
yeah,
always look at it as like, befriending them. It's like having grandmas and grandpas all over the place, and they're like, yeah, that's that
yeah.
guy that's flying that whirly bird.
There's not a whole lot of 55 plus community in Florida, so you're safe.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, right.
Everything's this is where you come to die.
Hey, so your online persona and your critique and comments and all that stuff is that part of your brand and your show, if you will, or is
Um,
that
I mean,
genuine
this is who I am.
frustration and yeah,
This is genuinely who I am. I come from my background is primarily automotive and is very like
yeah,
once upon a time maybe I wasn't like this, but you spend 10, 11 years in a shop working with guys, it sort of comes off on you. And I was the youngest guy. I was the youngest guy in my
yeah,
market
yeah.
and doing what I did. So I always had a chip on my shoulder when I was there. Now that sort of blended over into what I do here and just being bold. I hate wasting people's time. So if something isn't what it should be, you sort of say you sort of blurt it out. Now I come under a lot of fire for doing that. Obviously it's not
Mhm.
everybody's cup of tea, how I respond to people or how I handle myself. But, at the end of the day, the only person that has to deal with that blowback is me, essentially. I have to deal with
Yeah,
that blowback. Do I feel bad sometimes of how I do? Like, I'll be completely real. I feel bad sometimes about how I dealt the cards to Paul. You know, I felt bad about that. Like
yeah,
I was a little hard on him, but at the end of the day, it's business is business. And if something is not kosher, it needs to be said. And sometimes the delivery isn't always as soft, and how it lands isn't soft. So, but and I've had spats with me and you have had sort of cold like sort of arguments, but we've never really had a spat per se. I always just
no,
look at
not that.
like yeah, I always look at it like this. Like I always thought, when I first met you at Drone DJ, there was something there. Like the quality of content was good. The articles were good. When I saw you go with Drone XL, I was like, holy shit, he's really going for this. It's a good brand name. It's a great image. The content's good. And now, I thought you were crazy DJ a little bit because I was like, shit, he's gonna really try this. But now you look at the brand Drone XL and you're there. You're like, that's what people talk about when they're thinking about UAS news, like in general. You built a really solid
Mhm.
brand. You did that on your own. I think that's unmatched at this point. That's hard to do today, especially in this little niche to really get a lot of
Yeah.
traction like that. But I think you did what was right. Um, and then like I look at like what Greg's doing here with Pilot Institute. I didn't know who Pilot Institute was until a couple of months ago. I'm seeing these ads pop up in my Facebook feed and the colors. See, what gets me is the colors, the purple and pink, man. I told you this. The purple, the pink, the blue. It's catchy. You're like, you click on a link, the more now I talk to him, his ads won't stop appearing.
You did it. You clicked on it. That's
It's
it.
it's
Now we
like
have
it's
you.
like it knows,
You're
but
hooked.
I think there's great people in
Yeah,
this industry commercially, but then I think there are those that are only out for the money aspect, which is not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing that you can't make a living. I just would say
hmm
is don't be deceptive or don't be strategically deceptive. I think those are the worst. The ones that are strategically deceptive, because then you don't know what to believe, because there are some half
yeah.
truths, but then there's also lies. So, when I'm trying to not get involved in those like that drama situations as frequent, I've come
Yeah.
under fire, for stuff like that myself. And it sucks when you're the target of somebody's video because it does cause um, turmoil in a business, like
hmm
and it causes unnecessary stress. So for that person,
I mean,
myself, and just in general,
I've tried to stay out of it. I mean, we had that with in the beginning in 2017-18 with the guy in England who's pretty opinionated. I've tried to
right?
stay out of all those mud fights basically because in the end, the drone industry, which totally surprised me by the way, is such a small group of people. You keep
Really
running
is.
into guys. And I think picking fights and burning bridges in that sense doesn't help you and doesn't help the other people either. So
I don't
tried to stay out
genuinely
of it.
dislike anybody, you know. And I'll say
No.
this to whoever's listening. I don't ever I don't hold grudges. I never hold grudges. You know, I'm Italian, but I don't hold grudges. I'm very quick to apologize if I'm wrong. I'll apologize. I'll shake your hand and I'll say, hey, I was wrong. But the same token, you know, I'm still gonna call it like I see it.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think, yeah, there's nothing wrong with
calling it.
I mean, the industry's small, but it's big. It's like you said, everybody knows everybody. I think at this point, which is it's sort of a uniqueness about this particular genre of tech. We got to call it tech because that's really what it is essentially. But lots of trees hanging off of it, though.
Yep. So we always have a question towards the end. We're close to an hour, and it feels like we've been talking for 10 minutes. What's your favorite drone to fly?
Favorite drone to fly as of now, GPS drone, the Air 2S right now.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
It's a good
platform.
Why?
It's small, 30 plus minutes of battery life. I personally think the camera sensor is sharper, clearer. The 10-bit color and D-Log looks amazing. They did a good job. Like, again, I don't really buy into the Hasselblad naming on the Mavic 2 Pro. So I think the color just looks amazing. Even though it doesn't have an adjustable aperture, I think that's perfectly fine. But
I think a lot of people, I mean, unless you're a professional and you really need those features, I think a lot of people put too much emphasis perhaps on those features.
Yeah.
I think if you look at value for money, the Air 2S is unbeaten. I don't think you can buy a better drone that does more and is more capable than that drone at this point.
But, you know, it goes back to, I think a lot of people, they're going to be quick to want to buy something. And, you know, they don't want to master their basic fundamentals. Like, you know, you master those basic fundamentals of filming, utilizing your lighting, just utilizing, you know, color. I think you're going to get a lot out of your flight. A lot of times too, you know, people always, well, how can I make my footage better? And I yell at them. I say, stop flying midday. Choose either the morning or the evening to fly. If you fly morning or evening, you're going to get amazing footage. You're going to get amazing footage every single time.
You see that with photography as well, right? I mean, people get so hung up on gear, like lenses, cameras, sensors, like all the specs and stuff.
We all do it.
Drones, it's the same. But at the end of the day, you need to get out there and fly your drone and try new stuff. Find different perspective, different angles. Fly in the morning, fly at night. I mean, that's what's going to make the video look better or the photos look better. And it doesn't matter if it's an Air 2S or the Mavic 2 Pro.
Yeah, I mean, I spent this past week in a car primarily with Billy, and we drove around, you know, for different spots, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, like mostly the Northeast. And our goal was we were driving during midday, and we would get to our locations like about 4:30. So we had basically from 4:30 to about 8 to fly. So 4-hour windows to go location. But we were strategic about it, and we tried to fly every single day the same time. And then, you know, it made to be able to cover locations quicker. But it also gave us the best lighting to work with, and it worked out. And, you know, you got great shots out of it, and it makes your post-processing so much easier. Obviously, with professional photography, you don't get to choose what time you're going to shoot. But when you're doing something for you, I think it's important to just choose your time you're going to shoot in.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Looking at the time here, we've covered more than an hour. I think we're going to wrap this show up. Ken, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Looking forward to talking to you. So for everybody else, awesome. For everybody else who's listening or watching this on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe and like our channel. I mean, it's as you probably know, it helps us a great deal to get those likes and to have people share our show. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Ken, for being with us today.